Have you ever had someone break down crying on your front lawn while dialing 911 because you wouldn't give them a garage remote? Yeah, me neither. At least not until my grandparents' Victorian stood as the silent witness to the most surreal camping crisis of my life. It all started on a crisp autumn evening. The normally serene landscape of our family property was suddenly transformed into a chaotic scene that none of us would ever forget. As twilight descended over the sprawling estate, a commotion erupted near the old carriage house. At first, I thought it was just a stray neighbor in distress, but soon I realized that the sound of frantic 911 dialing and muffled sobbing carried an air of absurdity. And then I saw her, Karen, the notorious enforcer of all things proper in our gated community. Her face contorted in indignation and panic as she sprinted across the manicured lawn toward the source of the disturbance. Little did she know that what she thought was an emergency was about to flip her world upside down. Karen had always prided herself on her strict adherence to rules and her unwavering commitment to maintaining the pristine order of our neighborhood. But that night, as she rushed to rescue someone who'd apparently overstepped the bounds of acceptable behavior, she completely missed the obvious. She was not on her own land. In her haste, she had trespassed onto the property of the Johnsons, my family's land, where my cousins and I had set up a secret camping spot every fall for fun and bonding. The sight of Karen, tears mingling with fury as she pleaded for help from strangers, was both ludicrous and strangely heartbreaking. It was a moment so bizarre that it would soon become the catalyst for an epic showdown. A moment when Karen's self-righteous crusade would come crashing down. As I stood by, stunned and amused in equal measure, I knew that this was the tipping point. Our family had always cherished our traditions, our freedom to enjoy our land on our own terms, and tonight, Karen's overzealous intervention was about to be met with a wake-up call she would never forget. Our story unfolds on the expansive grounds of the Johnson family estate, a legacy passed down through generations, steeped in history and wild freedom. Nestled on the outskirts of the tightly regulated Maplewood gated community, our property was a vast, unspoiled piece of land where old oaks stood sentinel and fields stretched into the horizon. It was here that my cousins and I had created our own secret haven, a makeshift campground hidden among the whispering pines, a place where laughter mingled with the rustle of leaves, and where we celebrated the simple joys of life. In stark contrast to our free-spirited hideaway, Maplewood gated community was a model of suburban uniformity. Every house was an identical masterpiece of architectural conformity, every lawn trimmed to perfection, and every resident was expected to adhere strictly to the Homeowners Association (HOA) guidelines. The enforcer of these rules was none other than Karen Miller, known to everyone as HOA Karen. In her early 50s, Karen was the embodiment of order, her wardrobe meticulously chosen, her clipboard never far from her hand, and her eyes always scanning the neighborhood for even the slightest deviation from the norm. Karen's passion for enforcing the rules was legendary. Over the years, she had issued fines for trivial matters: a mismatched mailbox here, a flower bed not arranged in perfect symmetry there. Her presence was both feared and begrudgingly respected. In her mind, she was the guardian of Maplewood's pristine image, and she took that responsibility with a fervor that bordered on fanaticism. Our family, on the other hand, had always valued the freedom to live and celebrate on our own terms. The Johnson estate was our sanctuary, a place where traditions were cherished and where the laughter of children and the stories of elders wove together into a tapestry of memories. Our annual camping trip was a rite of passage, a time when we gathered around crackling campfires, shared ghost stories under starlit skies, and created our own little world far removed from the strictures of suburban life. It was a celebration of individuality, creativity, and the enduring spirit of family. So when Karen Miller, in one of her most audacious moves yet, decided to commandeer our cherished campground by calling 911 over what she perceived as a camping violation, she had crossed an invisible line. Unbeknownst to her, she had trespassed on land that belonged to my family, a place where we celebrated freedom and creativity. The irony was palpable. While Karen was busy policing her meticulously curated community, we were living life in its raw, unfiltered form, unburdened by arbitrary rules. As the evening grew darker and the 911 call reverberated through the neighborhood, the stage was set for a confrontation that would challenge not only Karen's authority, but also the very values that Maplewood gated community held dear. My cousins and I exchanged determined glances, knowing that our family sanctuary was about to become the battleground for a war of ideals, a battle between the rigidity of imposed order and the boundless spirit of personal freedom. The initial shock of Karen's 911 call rippled quickly through the community. Neighbors gathered outside the Johnson estate, some recording the incident on their phones, others simply whispering in disbelief. The fire department was dispatched, and soon, officials arrived to assess the emergency that Karen had reported. They found nothing more than a group of happy campers, enjoying an impromptu evening under the stars, a scene so ordinary that it belied the chaos it had inadvertently triggered. Meanwhile, Karen was nowhere to be found. Rumors swirled that she had retreated to her meticulously kept home, likely fuming at the disruption and dreading the inevitable fallout. The community forum exploded with posts. "Karen's at it again," one neighbor exclaimed, while another posted a meme featuring a frazzled Karen with the caption, "When you try to police fun but end up trespassing on someone else's land." The digital backlash was swift and fierce. For the first time, many residents openly criticized the overzealousness of the HOA enforcer, arguing that her actions were a gross overreach and a violation of basic common sense. Emboldened by the public's response and my own simmering resolve, I began to compile evidence of the intrusion. I reviewed security footage from that fateful night, noting every angle that captured our unsuspecting campers setting up their tents and laughing around crackling campfires. The footage, complete with timestamps, was indisputable proof that the camping was taking place on land that belonged to my family, not on public property or a communal lot. I also reached out to my cousins, who confirmed that our campsite had been in use for generations, a beloved tradition that had never before been challenged by the HOA. Their voices, filled with memories of past camping trips and the simple joy of shared family time, added a deeply personal dimension to the dispute. It wasn't merely about an unauthorized gathering. It was about preserving our heritage, our way of life that was increasingly threatened by the rigid impositions of those in power. Fueled by these revelations, I drafted a formal complaint to the HOA board, accompanied by a detailed dossier of evidence. I outlined how Karen's 911 call was not only baseless, but also an act of trespass on private property. I argued that her actions had disrupted a long-standing family tradition and infringed on our property rights. I submitted the complaint with the expectation that the board, often swayed by Karen's forceful personality, might at least show some leniency. But I knew that this confrontation was bigger than just one complaint. It was a symbol of the growing rift between a community that cherished individuality and one that was ruled by arbitrary rules. I began to see that Karen's actions had ignited a spark of rebellion among the residents. My digital dossier, complete with security footage and heartfelt testimonials from my cousins, started circulating online. Neighbors began sharing their own stories of similar transgressions, and soon, a groundswell of support emerged, united under hashtags like #OurLandOurRules and #NoMoreKaren. As the digital momentum built, whispers of an impending showdown filled the air. I organized a small meeting with a group of supportive neighbors who, like me, were fed up with the HOA's overreach. Together, we discussed strategies for demanding accountability and ensuring that such an invasion of privacy would never happen again. The consensus was clear. We had to stand together, challenge the authority of those who impose their personal biases on our lives, and reclaim our right to celebrate our traditions without interference. The tension grew palpable, both online and on the streets of Maplewood. The once quiet evenings were now charged with anticipation, as every resident braced for the inevitable confrontation. It was clear that Karen's overzealousness had not only disrupted our peaceful gatherings, but had also ignited a battle for the very soul of our community. A battle between the right to live freely and the imposition of arbitrary rules by a self-appointed enforcer. In the days following Karen's ill-fated 911 call, the atmosphere in Maplewood exploded with a fervor that no one had anticipated. Social media platforms became the battleground for voices that had long been silenced by strict HOA regulations. Videos of the camping event, interspersed with screenshots of Karen's frantic call, were shared relentlessly under hashtags such as hashtag #OurLanderRules, hashtag #NoMoreKaren, and hashtag #CampFreedom. Every shared post, every comment praising the family tradition of camping on private land, added to a growing digital dossier that painted a picture of a community ready to reclaim its rights. Local news stations, always on the lookout for a human interest story, flocked to the scene. Reporters captured the surreal spectacle of a quiet farm transformed into a lively campground, with families laughing, cooking over campfires, and enjoying the natural beauty of their heritage. It's an age-old tradition, one reporter explained on air, a celebration of community and freedom that has been a part of this family for generations. And today, it's under attack by an overzealous enforcer of suburban conformity. The narrative quickly shifted from a simple misunderstanding to a full-blown controversy about the clash between private property rights and arbitrary HOA control. Inside the HOA board, the mood was shifting dramatically. Emergency meetings were convened in locked conference rooms, and leaked minutes soon revealed a growing rift among board members. Some, traditionally aligned with Karen's strict vision, defended her actions as necessary for maintaining community order. But others, swayed by the overwhelming digital evidence and the passionate voices of the residents, began to question whether her behavior was truly in the best interest of the community. Our property should be a sanctuary for personal expression, not a canvas for enforcing outdated rules, one board member was overheard saying in a heated discussion. The internal conflict was mounting, and the digital dossier supporting our cause became a powerful tool in the hands of reform-minded residents. I continued to update my online community with every development. Live streams from my property showed the families enjoying their camping night. Children playing, adults sharing stories, and the soft glow of campfires illuminating faces filled with joy and defiance. I posted detailed accounts of the history of our family's land, emphasizing that the campground had been a cherished tradition passed down through generations. My posts resonated with many who had long felt the oppressive weight of arbitrary fines and intrusive HOA policies. The digital petitions demanding that the HOA board acknowledge and rectify Karen's overreach quickly garnered thousands of signatures. Influential local bloggers and social media personalities weighed in, their commentary echoing the sentiment that private property rights were non-negotiable. When a community stands together, one popular influencer wrote, even the most entrenched abuses of power can be toppled. The collective voice of Cedar Ridge was now impossible to ignore. Karen, meanwhile, tried to salvage her position by issuing a series of terse social media posts defending her actions. In one video, she claimed that the camping had disrupted community order and that she was merely upholding the rules. But every time she spoke, the digital evidence contradicted her claims. Videos of the happy, peaceful campers and testimonials from residents who recounted the deep family traditions tied to the land undermined her narrative. The more Karen tried to justify herself, the louder the community's outcry grew. As a final public hearing loomed, the tension reached a fever pitch. Neighbors organized rallies outside local community centers and even at the gates of the Maplewood Estates entrance. Banners reading "Our Land, Our Rules, and No More Arbitrary Fines" were hoisted high, and the collective energy was palpable. The media coverage intensified, with local TV channels broadcasting live segments from the neighborhood, capturing the passionate speeches of residents and the resolute expressions of those who had come to defend their rights. In the days leading up to the hearing, I worked tirelessly to compile a comprehensive digital dossier. Every frame of security footage, Every testimonial from a longtime resident and every screenshot of supportive messages was meticulously organized. This dossier would serve as irrefutable evidence that the campground had always been private property, that Karen's 911 call was baseless, and that the HOA's attempts to suppress our traditions were nothing short of tyranny. By the time the morning of the hearing arrived, Cedar Ridge was buzzing with anticipation. The final public hearing was set to be a watershed moment, a definitive showdown between the rigid control of the HOA and the indomitable spirit of a community that valued personal freedom above all. The stage was set for a dramatic confrontation, one that promised to redefine the balance of power and to ensure that no one would ever again have the audacity to police our land based on their personal biases. The decisive moment came on a crisp, clear morning in a packed boardroom at the Cedar Ridge Community Center. The room was filled with a diverse array of HOA officials, local law enforcement representatives, community leaders, and hundreds of determined residents, all gathered to witness the final vote that would shape the future of our community. With a calm yet resolute demeanor, Councilwoman Denise Thompson stepped up to the podium, her eyes alight with the collective resolve of a community that had finally had enough. After an exhaustive review of all digital evidence, including time-stamped security footage, detailed property records, and the impassioned testimonies of our residents, we have reached an inescapable conclusion. Councilwoman Thompson began, her voice steady and commanding. It is abundantly clear that the actions taken by Mrs. Karen Miller, specifically her baseless 911 call over an unauthorized camping event on private property, were not driven by any legitimate concern for community safety, but by personal bias and an abuse of power. Our community's rights to control our own land and to celebrate our cherished traditions are non-negotiable. A heavy silence fell over the room as Thompson continued. Effective immediately, the HOA board will rescind all fines and sanctions imposed as a result of this incident. Furthermore, we will launch a full disciplinary review of the practices that allowed such an overreach, and we will implement new guidelines that protect the property rights and creative freedoms of every resident in Cedar Ridge. Today's decision is not merely about reversing an arbitrary call. It is a resounding declaration that our community will no longer tolerate the imposition of personal vendettas on our land. Her words resonated powerfully, and murmurs of approval rippled through the assembly. At that moment, a respected community advocate, known for his tireless dedication to property rights, rose to speak. "Today, we stand united," he declared, his voice ringing with passion. "No resident should have their right to enjoy their property infringed upon by the petty whims of an overzealous enforcer. Let this vote be the turning point, a clear signal that Cedar Ridge values freedom, individuality, and the sanctity of private property above all else. We demand accountability, and we will not rest until every violation of our rights is addressed." His declaration was met with thunderous applause, uniting the room in a powerful call for change. Following his address, a senior officer from the local law enforcement office presented the final dossier, a meticulously compiled record of digital evidence, expert testimonies, and official statements that confirmed our long-standing right to use our land for private gatherings. The evidence was irrefutable. The campground was always private property, and Karen's 911 call was a flagrant abuse of power. The Internal Affairs Panel unanimously endorsed strict disciplinary measures, and the full report was scheduled for immediate public release to ensure transparency. Councilwoman Thompson concluded, "Let this resolution mark the dawn of a new era for Cedar Ridge, a community where every resident's rights are respected and where public authority is exercised with fairness and integrity. Our vote today is a resounding declaration that we will protect our freedoms and that no one, no matter how self-righteous, can impose their will on our community without accountability. Together, we stand for justice, transparency, and the inalienable right to live freely on our own property." Her final words, delivered with unwavering conviction, sealed the turning point in our battle for property rights and creative freedom. In that defining moment, As every face in the boardroom shone with determination and hope, the balance of power shifted irrevocably. The overwhelming digital evidence and the unified voice of the community forced the HOA board to take decisive action, a turning point that would forever reshape the governance of Cedar Ridge. The days of arbitrary rule enforcement were over, and a future built on respect for individual rights was finally within our grasp. In the weeks that followed the historic vote, Cedar Ridge underwent a profound transformation. News of the rescinded sanctions and the sweeping reforms enacted by the HOA board spread rapidly through local media and social networks, igniting fervent discussions about property rights, individual freedom, and community governance. Editorials in the local newspaper, with headlines such as "A New Dawn for Cedar Ridge" and "Community United for Freedom," celebrated the decisive action taken to protect the rights of every resident. Hashtags like #PropertyRights, #NoMoreHOA bullying, and #LandOfFreedom trended widely, reinforcing our collective determination to stand against arbitrary interference. Town hall meetings and community forums saw record attendance as residents gathered to share their experiences and to envision a future where personal expression and private traditions were not only tolerated but celebrated. Neighbors, who had long been intimidated by the strict oversight of the HOA, now spoke freely about their right to manage their own property and live as they pleased. "Our land is our legacy," one impassioned resident declared at a crowded meeting, his voice resonating with hope. The atmosphere was one of renewal, a promise that Cedar Ridge would always honor the creative spirit and individual rights of its people. Within the reformed HOA board and local law enforcement, swift changes were implemented. Senior officials, led by Director James Carter and Lieutenant Marcus Reed, launched comprehensive training programs on ethical conduct, cultural sensitivity, and the responsible management of community resources. Regular internal audits and transparent disciplinary processes were established to ensure that every complaint would be scrutinized fairly and that no resident would ever again be subjected to arbitrary fines or punitive actions. Our duty is to protect the rights and dignity of every member of this community, Lieutenant Reed affirmed in a follow-up press conference, reinforcing our renewed commitment to fairness and justice. Community leaders and local civil rights organizations mobilized further by organizing workshops, public forums, and educational campaigns to raise awareness about the importance of private property rights and creative freedom. When we stand together, our voices have the power to reshape even the most entrenched systems. A local activist proclaimed at a town hall meeting, inspiring neighbors to unite and demand a more inclusive and fair governance model. For me, the journey from confrontation to resolution was both deeply personal and profoundly transformative. My decision to stand up against HOA Karen's baseless overreach by reclaiming our land and turning her own misplaced authority against her had not only restored my right to enjoy our family's traditions, but had also ignited a movement that resonated throughout Cedar Ridge. Neighbors who had once suffered under arbitrary enforcement now found their voices and shared their own stories of resistance, uniting in a powerful call for change. The digital evidence that exposed Karen's misdeeds became a beacon of hope, a rallying cry for every resident who believed that our property rights and personal freedoms were inviolable. Karen Miller, once the dreaded enforcer of the HOA's draconian policies, was now reduced to a cautionary tale, a vivid reminder that no one is above accountability when the community stands united for justice. Her influence waned rapidly as records of her past transgressions circulated widely, underscoring the need for reform and the dangers of unchecked authority. At a final celebratory event held in the Central Park of Cedar Ridge, residents, local officials, and community advocates gathered beneath the soft glow of the setting sun. A large banner reading "Unity, Freedom, and Our Land" was unfurled between towering oaks, and heartfelt speeches resonated with promises of a brighter, more inclusive future. Today, we celebrate not just a victory over arbitrary interference, but the reclamation of our community's soul, Councilwoman Thompson proclaimed, her voice resolute and inspiring. The standing ovation that followed was a powerful affirmation of our collective commitment to protect our freedoms and ensure that no one can abuse public power again. As each new day dawned over Cedar Ridge, the legacy of that fateful confrontation endured as a beacon of transformative change. The story of how Karen's misguided 911 call over our camping turned into a watershed moment when she realized she was trespassing on our land became a rallying cry for every resident who believed in the sanctity of private property and the right to live freely. Every sunrise now carried the promise that in Cedar Ridge, truth, justice, and individual freedom would forever prevail. In the end, what began as a personal battle evolved into a watershed moment for our entire community. We emerged more united, more vigilant, and more determined to safeguard our rights against any form of bureaucratic overreach. And as the sun rose each morning over our reclaimed neighborhood, it carried with it the promise that Cedar Ridge would forever be a place where creativity, integrity, and respect for individual freedom shone as brightly as the dawn.